Hey guys, it's Sandy Missouri from Expert Book for You. And today I have a really exciting guest. I really can't wait to introduce you to him. He is quite literally my earliest influence when it comes to almost everything, actually, not just writing and editing and publishing, but literally just about everything. Because not only is he a lifelong journalist, editor, publisher, and author, he's also my dad. So I would like to welcome you today to my dad, Donald Harrison, and he's going to share with us about how he writes. So, Dad, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sandy.
So give me just 1 second because I'm just trying to make sure that it's streaming properly on Facebook. So all you out there in Facebook land, just bear with me just 1 second. There we go. Okay, good. We are good. We are live, and this is exciting. So I could go on and on and on and on and on about you,
Stu.
but I, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about yourself and what you do. So in your own words, so to speak. So please
Well,
go.
I put out the daily web publication called San Diego Jewish World, which covers San Diego, covers Jewish affairs, and also occasionally covers the rest of the world. And thus its name, San Diego Jewish World, because we're based here in San Diego. And we have approximately 50 writers who contribute regularly, not every week. Some of them a couple of times a week, some of them just once a month. But overall, like about 50 writers, among which I am one. And we put out the publication and enjoy it. And it's all volunteer.
So your slogan is "There's a Jewish story everywhere." What does that mean?
Well, I've always believed that you could go anywhere in this world and find a Jewish story. And some people think, well, isn't that presumptuous? But I say, no, that's actually can happen. And the reason, there really are three reasons, three basic reasons. One is the Bible. The influence of the Bible is all over the world. Um, you'll find that place names are come from the Hebrew Bible, or as the Christians call it, the Old Testament. You'll find that people name their children for the biblical characters. Towns are named for places in the Bible. So that's one aspect of finding Jewish culture wherever you go. A second aspect is the fact that Jews are peripatetic. We've been everywhere, sometimes not willingly. We've been tossed out of various countries over the eons. But also our people have moved around, became merchants in many instances. We got involved in the various communities, became civic leaders, and you can see their influence in various towns and cities. Uh, and the third reason is because of the modern nation of Israel, and whether the countries in the world are friends of Israel or enemies of Israel, they're nevertheless impacted by Israel. So again, there's a Jewish story there. So those are the three reasons why I think I can find a Jewish story if I try, no matter where I go.
What was the most surprising Jewish story you found or cultivated?
That's a good question. One for which I don't have much of an answer. Let's see.
Because you didn't feed me that one.
No, no, surprising. Well, it's where you find a Jewish story where you wouldn't expect it, I guess. Although I think you can find one everywhere. Sometimes, even when you do find one, you say, "Wow, isn't that amazing?" So, like, I had I had an experience with your son, my grandson, Shore. One time, he and I went on a trip up the Interstate 15 from from San Diego all the way to the first city in Canada above the border crossing of the 15, which is Lethbridge, Canada, in the province of Alberta. And so I said to Shore, I said, Shore, why don't you Google these two words and see if anything comes up? Lethbridge, and Jewish. And Shore said, nah, nothing's going to happen. I said, well, try it anyway, Shore. So he does it. And he says, well, I'll be darned. He says, look at that. He says, there is a professor at the University of Lethbridge who teaches Yiddish literature and English literature. And I said, you're kidding. Here in Lethbridge, Canada, there's a professor. So we called her up and we left a message for her saying, I'm a journalist. I'm finding Jewish stories wherever I can go. I'd like to meet her. And she calls back and she says, well, if this is not a prank, she says, why don't you meet me? Let's do it at a public place. She had no idea who was calling. And let's let's meet at a restaurant. So we met at a restaurant in Lethbridge, and we chatted. And she loved Shore and liked me, and we got along so famously that she also invited us to have dinner with her that evening, and with her husband as well. And we found out that not only was she teaching Yiddish, but she was in fact the daughter of a very well-known Yiddish writer named Chava Rosenfarb, and that she was the translator of her books. And her name was Goldie Morgenthaler. It turned out that Goldie's father was also very well known in Canada as, you might say, the author or the instigator of that country's abortion law,
Oh,
because
wow.
he gave he performed an abortion and he was put on trial for it because at the time it was illegal,
Wow.
and the jury refused to convict him, and so he was found innocent. And then the government, the parliament, tried to overturn the verdict of the jury, and that
Mm,
got their high court involved, and the high court said you can't do that. Um, so if you they say the Morgenthaler law in Canada, they'll know who you're talking about. Anyway, it was his daughter, and so we
wow.
just had a wonderful conversation, and it was just by googling those two words because of the accent of where the city was atop of the I-15.
Wow. So I'm gonna change up the interview from what I've been asking other people, because your books are not like the clients that I've interviewed previously this week, in that your books are not written as a business authority book, but you write books on topics of interest to you. And so I want to talk about your writing process and how you go about coming up with the concept for the book, and then, going from I have this flash of an idea to I have a book in my hand.
Well, I have a couple of books that worked on the same premise. One of them was called 77 Miles of Jewish Stories.
That's,
And there it is.
yeah, here it is. This is it.
Um, and what I
Available on
decided,
Amazon, people. Available on Amazon. Just look up his name, Donald H. Harrison.
thank you, dear.
You're welcome.
Um, what I decided to do was follow the Interstate 8 from its beginning, its origin point at near the Pacific Ocean, to east to where it crossed into the next county, the Imperial County. And it turned out that there were some 35 exits on the Interstate 8. And I decided I would get off at each exit and see if I could find a Jewish story. Well, as it turned out, I found 70 Jewish stories that are all published in that book, and at least one from every exit. And in some cases, there were some exits that had more than one. And I found them through a variety of ways. Some were very, very easy. You got off the exit and there was a synagogue. Boom, that was, there's a Jewish story. Other times you get off and there's a Jewish deli. So those kinds are the easy ones. You might call it the low hanging fruit. Um, then I would find some that, as I mentioned before, there was religious connections to to Judaism, but they weren't Jewish, like a church that had a program that was run by Jewish Family Service for refugees in El Cajon, where we have the largest or second largest population of Chaldeans, that is Iraqi Christians in the nation. So wherever you go, you would find a story. Another story was, a woman, a Jewish woman out in the way out in the back country, who was raising different kinds of animals, llamas and alpacas and things like that. Um, Another one was a family that had survived one of our major wildfires. Uh, and they had a menorah in their window with the lights of the menorah, and you can just imagine that juxtaposed with the lights of a wildfire coming towards you. So these are the kinds of stories that I could find just following the highway. And I did these stories over a period of time, published them, and then collected them all and put it into that volume. Excuse me.
You
Hmm.
got some water there?
And that's all right.
So
You
you're
want some
the
more?
first, yeah, I do. I have some water here. So the first book that you published was published well before I got into this business. Um, and it's a book about San Diego's first Jewish settler, Lewis Rose. Obviously, I'm telling this to the audience because you already know what your book is about. Um, and that book was very different in that it did not come from a series of articles that you had previously written. So maybe tell me about the process for that book. I mean, start from the very beginning. What inspired you to write it? And then what did you do once you decided that you were going to write a book about a historical figure and, taking it into actuality?
Well, back in the late 1980s, I was contacted by a company called Historic Tours of America. And they owned, among other things, the Old Town Trolley Tours in Key West and the Contour train there, and various other cities that they had trolleys. And they asked me if I would help them establish the trolley line there, which involved not only hiring the cast, and laying out the route, but also developing a script. And the more I went around the city, the more I ran into this name, Lewis Rose. Um, it turned out that we have a place called Rose Canyon, which is not named for the flower, but is named for him. And
Hmm.
within Rose Canyon, there's Rose Creek. And in our Point Loma area, there's a section called Roseville. And at the State Historic Park, San Diego State Historic Park, there is in Old Town. There is the Robinson Rose building. And so wherever I would go, there was Rose, Rose, Rose. So I said, I wonder who this guy is. The more I looked into it, the more I found that there seemed to be two kinds of histories. There were Jewish histories which traced the development of Jewish institutions, but paid little attention to the overall civic polities. And then there were civic histories of different cities, which barely mentioned the Jewish contributions. And I thought, why don't I try to tell the story of San Diego through the eyes of Lewis Rose, in that he was very much involved in the early city. He was a member of the city board of trustees. He was on the board of education. He was on the first county board of supervisors. He was on the grand jury. He helped develop these areas that I mentioned, created the first tannery. So, in following uh, Lewis Rose's life, and that meant going to many archives throughout the city and sometimes even outside of the city, um, I found all these different stories and the different ways that he was involved in the development of the city, and wrote this book really covering how San Diego developed from 1850, which was the year he arrived, through 1888, which was the year he died.
Hmm.
So it was a lot of archival work, which I found that I enjoyed very, very much.
So, I mean, nowadays we just try to find everything online. So for those that are, let's say Shore's age, or maybe haven't had a old world experience where you're looking in libraries and microfiche, when you say that you're going to these archives, it's like a library. I mean, what actually?
Yeah, well, there are a number of resources that, for example, the San Diego History Center has. Um, Some of it are old newspaper clippings, that go all the way back till his life, you know, into the 1800s. Another of it is, as you mentioned, microfilm, which the newspaper that was called the San Diego Herald. which came out every week. You could read every issue of it. It was like a 4-page newspaper, and I found very quickly that it was usually on page 2 that you would find the local news. And so I would go through it, and whenever Lewis Rose's name popped up, I would take a note on it. They also had oral interviews with people old timers who talked about people they knew, and some actually remembered Lewis Rose, and that showed up in it and so forth. And then, there are artifacts that people have donated to the History Center. And um, these are the kind of things that you also find. I decided to go a little further than San Diego and travel to Germany, to his hometown, in a place called Neuhaus an der Ost. And then he immigrated from Germany to New Orleans. So I went then to New Orleans and went to various archives there and actually found his ketubah, his marriage certificate, which was in the collection of Tulane University,
Oh, wow.
and continued on his route across the country by wagon train. I didn't go by wagon train, but he did, um, to San Diego, and try to visit all the places that I was able to establish that he had been at. And all this contributed to the writing of this particular historical biography. And it wasn't just a biography; it was a history of early San Diego as well as a biography, all kind of rolled into one.
Hmm. Got it. So, I mean, really, just a lot of footwork and research.
Yeah, yeah, and an appreciation, I guess, for story.
Mm.
I was amazed at how involved this guy was in early San Diego. And I have to say that Jews have been involved in San Diego really since the very beginning. And even today, from then till today, we have members of the Jewish community who are very, very active in civic affairs and hold public office and so forth.
And you did another book that was also outside of the time when I was publishing, and wouldn't have needed me anyway. And this was a private book for a company, right?
Yes. Yeah, that was very interesting. There's a company called Waxie, which is owned by the Wax family. And that's how they got the name in it. They're the largest privately owned sanitary supply company in the country. They service something like 13 Western states. Um, and with their headquarters are here in San Diego. And so Charles Wax, who is the CEO, chairman and CEO of the company, asked me if I would write this book, starting with an investigation of his own family, in terms of their history. So that was fun, digging into the family. His father, Morris Wax, was a tank in the tank corps, serving under George Patton, and there were lots of materials about both his life and Patton's campaigns that we could draw from. There were He had another, you might call him a cousin, who parachuted during World War II on D-Day and died in a drowned in a like a paddy or a pond, who was quite a hero and had grown up here in San Diego. Uh, and so we told those stories in addition to how the company developed from a small from a small company to this very, very large one, and that was fun.
And so, I mean, I just kind of want to go through the process, from the writer's standpoint, right? You're contacted by somebody who wants you essentially to write I guess a corporate biography, uh, and then where do you go from there? I mean, do they already have a really clear idea of what they wanted that book to look like, or was it like, okay, now we want to hire you and just go and do something?
Well, it was a collaborative process. That particular book involved well over 100 interviews. I think it was about 105 or 106 different people that I interviewed, um, starting with the story of the family and then moving out from the family into the original business here in San Diego and into their expansion into other cities. And each step of the way involved different people who had to be interviewed, and we would tell their stories as well as the acquisition process and what happened and how that changed things and so forth. And some of the people that we interviewed also were their vendors, like there's a fellow by the name of I think it's Canfor, if I remember correctly, who owns the Purell company, which everybody seems to be using today with the coronavirus pandemic,
Yeah, right.
right? And how that company got started, and how the relationship between them and Waxie, um, how Waxie was able to have as much toilet paper as it ever needed during the pandemic, because that's what they supply, among other products. And so it was for me a great learning experience as well as an interesting writing experience.
Mm. And um, so most of your more recent books, the last four, like I can't. This one's your most recent, right? The newest Schlepping.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
Schlepping and Schmoozing through San Diego County.
Yeah, volume two.
Right. Well,
Oh,
what I did was volume one were stories that came from within the city of San Diego, and volume two were stories that came from the outlying villages and other cities within the county. The county of San Diego actually has 18 incorporated cities, including the city of San Diego. And so I divided it up that way. And the stories actually had been written over a number of years. Um, and I just picked, I'm one of these people who saves the stories he writes. And so I went through all the stories and categorized them by the city that they were in and put them together. It's not every story I wrote, but the ones I thought would be interesting to people that might, tell about how a particular institution was founded, or, some sort of interesting history.
so for somebody who wants to write a book,
Yeah.
and if they could think of it instead of as, oh, I have to write this book, but instead as a series of articles, and then they need only to figure out how to write essentially one article at a time.
Yes.
What is the process you go through when you're, when, I mean, I know that you put out stories every single day. And some days I know it's really easy because there's something happening in the world that you're going to write about. But some days I know that you have to find something to write about. So what is that process? And then how do you go about finding the information?
Well, you probably remember when you were a little girl that we would occasionally go on hikes, and if there was a plaque or something, what did I have you do? I think I had you read the plaque
No,
into a tape
I
recorder.
think that was after my time. I think you started doing that with Heather.
Oh, I know I did it with Heather. I thought
Yeah.
I also did it with you. No,
I,
I'm good.
I don't,
Um,
not as much, I don't think.
anyway, I was always interested in finding, historical facts and so forth, and kind of filing them away, not knowing exactly when I would use them. So I'm one who likes to haunt museums and go to see history wherever it occurs. Um, I like to read books about the areas that I'm visiting, and so I try to pull from all of these things threads that I can then weave into a new tapestry.
So, for somebody who, most of my authors are experts and they're writing what we call a business authority book, which is designed to showcase their expertise.
Right.
For the most part, they can probably write it from their head. But if there's something that they need to, investigate or find articles about, what would you, and also pull, drawing on your experience of teaching journalism, how would you advise them to get started? Starting a book can be so overwhelming for so many people.
So the process then physically of writing, I always advise people to just start. And by that I mean, I think I saw a program of yours where you called it a brain dump. Um, and I think what happens is people freeze up in front of a computer screen or in front of a blank piece of paper, and they say, "Oh, I've got to start off perfectly." Well, no, you don't. All you need to do is to start telling the story. and then you can come back later and polish it. But start getting your thoughts down on paper. And I found when I first started writing as a professional, I was right after college. I was hired by the Associated Press, and they put me immediately on the broadcast desk. And the reason they had us on the broadcast desk is we were supposed to write stories that could be ripped and read. In other words, that we had a teletype machine. The people would just rip it off the teletype machine and they would read it when it was time for the news. And they taught us that we should write in present tense, active voice, uh, avoid too many sibilants because that messed up the microphones. Not too many P's because that also didn't
Yeah.
sound, you know.
Yeah.
And, um, but most of all, they had us chattering to ourselves. They said, while you're writing it, sound it out, see how it sounds. If you can't say it, either can the guy who has to read it. Short if you can. Don't give us these convoluted sentences with lots of commas and subordinate phrases. Make it simple so that it can be read and digested. And that became part of my pattern of writing. Although I've, over the years, I have to admit that I've added a few subordinate phrases, but I do try to write in active voice.
Or peripatetic Perez pursues peace.
Yeah, sometimes I do have these parenthetical phrases, but the point is that if it sounds good to you when you're saying it, it's going to be easy to read. And I have read other authors, particularly beginning authors, because I've been called on to edit people's books occasionally. And what happens is they get so convoluted in trying to say something instead of trying to say it simply. They try to make themselves sound so authoritative that it becomes all bollock stuff, and you have to basically simplify it so that people can understand it. So, if my advice to writers is one, start, two, use active voice because it's easier to understand than passive voice. Three, try to make your sentence construction simple. I don't mean you have to go look, 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 see Jane run, but don't get too involved in your sentence structure. Try to make it easy for people to follow. Try to put yourself in the position of your reader and write for your reader rather than for your colleagues.
Mm.
Don't you know if you're writing for someone who you're thinking is the professor of the subject that you're writing about, then you're writing for an audience of one. And what you really want to be doing is writing for a mass audience. So simplify it. And believe me, the professor that you're thinking of won't mind at all.
And so, I mean, sometimes people need to do more, get the answers from interviews or other people or research. And so when it's not something that they already know and they can just pull the information from their own brain, how do
Right.
you recommend that they go about it?
Well, before I mentioned I did over 100 interviews with for the Waxie book, and interviews are, I think you should always have a digital tape recorder with you so that you can talk to people and have it on record, and you can transcribe it later and take those quotes that are most useful for your narrative. So the question then becomes, well, how do you set up an interview? And if you're doing a personal interview, I recommend that you start from the beginning and ask the person about um, their parents and their situation growing up, because that's a great equalizer. We all had parents and we all had interesting lives growing up.
Oh,
And
interesting. So no matter what the topic, that's where you would start. Where did you grow up?
if I'm doing a profile about a person,
Oh, okay. Okay.
but if let's say if I'm doing a history piece, then I might be asking the curator, well, how did this get started? What
Mm.
what what brought this condition about? What's the background to this story? And let people tell stories from the beginning. Um, and that way, you don't have to guess. Later on, when you're writing your own story, you can seize those elements that you feel are most essential to your story. But it's better to know more and to ask more than you need. It's better to capture more information than you're actually going to use, assuming your interview subject is patient with
Yeah,
you.
that's one of the things that I really struggle with in interviews is having enough questions and having the right questions. How do you figure that out?
Well, I think after a while it becomes second nature. You just sort of know where you're going to go in a thing. But I think for someone who hasn't done it a lot, you probably ought to get a piece of paper and write down just key words that you want to ask them about. You don't want to start reading your questions because that has a tendency to kill an interview. Um, but if you have like just a topic word, like, oh, I want to ask him about his interview technique, and you just write down interview technique,
Mm,
question mark, things like that, and maybe pick three or four things that you want to talk about in your interview. And then probably the most important thing you can do in an interview is listen and let the person who you're interviewing tell you what's really important. Those questions that you're asking, or you might say, are your backup questions. If that person has nothing else to say, at least you'll find that out.
mm,
But sometimes if you let the person talk or you invite them to talk, they'll tell you stories that you never realized were possible, that were out there. And they're far more interesting than the questions that you've come up with. One of the things that I always do when I do an interview is at the end of it, I'll say, is there a question I should have asked you? And they'll say, gosh, yeah, I was wondering if you ever would get around to. I said, well, what story is that? What's the question? And they said, well, I really wish you had asked me about whatever it might be. And then they'll go on and you just think, oh, I could just throw away the rest of that interview because this is the story. And because everybody has a good story to tell if you only are willing to hear it.
mm. Yeah, you definitely drilled that one into my head early on. It's
Good.
it's on my list of questions, I promise. The last one.
Good. Right. You get to the end of this interview with me and you ask me, is there a question I should have asked? I
Yeah.
already have my answer.
Okay, well, hold on to it until that point.
Okay.
We're almost there.
Oh, God, it's been going
Almost.
so quickly.
Yeah, I know. Well, so actually, and that brings me to a question. I mean, I knew that this would be an easy interview. I know that you're always prepared and or not prepared, but always ready to talk on the fly.
I
Um,
can't.
yeah, but what do you do when you have somebody that is not an easy interview that that really answers your question with as few words as possible? And it's, I mean, how do you draw it out of somebody at that point?
Sometimes I say, please don't make me feel like a dentist that I have to pull teeth. You know, tell me more. Um, by active listening, you can often get people to elaborate. And by active listening, I mean repeating what they have to say um, so that they know that you've understood it. And then asking them, can you tell me more? And sometimes they will volunteer more. You know, Also try not to phrase your questions in such a way that it can be answered yes or no. You
Mm,
know, you know, do you like men? Yes. Right? Yeah. Well, what kind of a man most appeals to you? Well, now the person might answer forever,
hmm
or vice versa. If you ask a guy what kind of a woman appeals to you, but do you like them? Yes or no questions you should try to avoid.
and beyond that, what other tricks are there to draw information out of I mean, maybe somebody's just not a
Well,
real verbal person.
if you have done your research about the person before your interview, I mean, if you do an interview cold, you're kind of stuck. But if you know, for example, let's say you've read everything you possibly can on the internet about the person, Um, you've also read about the person's field and so forth. Then you can ask them open-ended questions about a particular experience or particular development in the field, and ask them what is their opinion of that particular situation.
Mm.
So let's say in politics, let's say you're talking to a political figure, you might say, there's been a bunch of controversy lately about mail-in ballots and whether they are a good way to conduct an election or whether they're potentially subject to fraud. What do you think? Well, the person can't just say yes or no.
Mm.
So, and yet it's an area within that person's field of expertise. So hopefully you'll get an answer.
So,
You know,
so you can try to get an opinion out of them and then try to get them to defend their opinion.
well, you don't have to necessarily make them defend it. Just their opinion might in itself be worth the story. But getting them to elaborate on the opinion, say, well, I'm against it. Well, okay, why?
But yeah, so that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and so forth.
And do you, I mean, why do you think it's important for people to tell their stories or to write their book? I guess, do you think it's important? And if so, then why?
Well, let me talk more about the favorite kind of book that I like to read and also
Okay.
write. And these are called memoir books, as opposed to the professional books of authority books, I believe you call them.
Yeah.
I mean, those are important, but for the very reason that you mentioned before on your program that it's the best business card you can give somebody, I suppose, is your book. But memoir books, I think all of us want to leave a legacy of some sort. We want to be remembered. We want people to know that we were here. And of course, one way is through our children. I mean, clearly, if there was a Sandy Harrison, Missouri, now there must have been somebody before her. You know, so that's one way. But another way, of course, is to tell the stories of your life. That is particularly those stories that you think people might be interested in. And I think that in every person, there's a wonderful memoir that to be written, some of which will be of interest to a broad audience, others which will be of interest mainly to their families and their friends. But each one is worthwhile. And I believe that they do a service by writing them down and publishing them.
Hmm. So, I mean, do you think that everybody should write a book?
Well, it was up to me. I would say yes. No, I love to read other people's books. I just finished reviewing another one. I do a lot of book reviews on San Diego Jewish World, www.sdjewishworld.com. I'm sorry, that was a plug.
That's all right. It was
Um,
going to be my next question.
um, and I mean, this was about a woman who I would say she had three main themes in her book. One was how she tried to create interconnections for people who were new to a city by hosting them at dinners and lunches at her house, but not just for a few people, but like she would have 40 people at a time for. She was Jewish. She had Shabbat dinners. Uh, Secondly, she had a child with Down syndrome, and she wrote about some of the problems that she had in getting her child, who was high functioning, um, to be included in schooling, and she had to fight for that. And so she talked about these kinds of issues. And then this woman who was also an inveterate traveler, but she travels on a budget, and so she has some crazy stories to tell about some of the places all over the world where she went, where they're basically camping out, no Hiltons for them. And so it was a very, very interesting story that she told, and I wish I could remember the title of it.
Oh, no.
But I can tell you that the author's name is Jody Samuels. That I remember. But the title was something like chutzpah, something, something, something.
Mm.
Anyway, but it's a wonderful memoir, and she had a lot to say about her life. And then I've read countless memoirs of people who have survived the Holocaust, and or their children, growing up as a second generation and so forth. Uh, every one of these stories, stories of immigrants who have made it to who come to this country and have scrapped and saved and have made a success of their lives. All of these stories are just wonderful to read, as far as I'm concerned.
Someone who's thinking to start their memoir, what would you recommend they do first?
Well, what I said before, and I would start at the beginning with the earliest memories and talking about their parents. Who was your mother? Who was your father? Who were your grandparents? What stories do you remember being passed down about them? And put them down on paper first.
Mm,
It establishes a base, and then you can start talking about some of your early memories of schooling and stuff. Um, and don't worry if you don't remember them in order, because you can later edit them into an order. But as those stories occur to you, you should write them down. Or if it's easier for you, just talk talk them into your digital recorder. I used to say tape recorder, but now it's a digital recorder.
right, yeah. People don't know what tape is anymore.
Yeah, but talk them into your recorder, and have them transcribed, and then edited and put in a logical order. I think that will often do it. Sometimes that logical order is chronology. Other times it may be the subject matter, the theme, different themes that you might want to strike about your life. But
Mm,
that comes in the editing. The first thing you got to do is just get the story told.
right. Yeah. So, I mean, basically, to start.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Well, we've pretty much covered all the questions I had planned and unplanned. So tell me, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Yes, I've been waiting for that question, and my answer is, duh, I don't know. No, you did a fine job, Sandy.
Oh, thank
Thank
you,
you so
Dad.
much for allowing me the opportunity.
That's it? That's all
That's
you want
it.
to? That's the only. Okay. So, how can people learn more about you, your books, and San Diego Jewish World?
Well, San Diego Jewish World is available to everybody. It's a free website. It's www.sdjewishworld.com. SD stands for San Diego, of course, so sdjewishworld.com. And then uh, if if you see a story, at the top of the story is a person's byline, and um, on our site, if you click on the person's byline, it will bring up that person's archive, and you can see all the other stories that they've written over the years. Um, and some of our writers have many hundreds of stories that they've written about.
Only hundreds, Dad?
Well, for me, I think I'm up to 1900 and something right now.
Okay. That sounds
But
more
I
like
mean,
it.
but other writers have several hundred or more. There's one writer that's up in the thousands as well,
Wow.
in Israel. And so that's San Diego Jewish World. Uh, Amazon uh, carries my books under my name, Donald H. Harrison, and I would love for anybody to go there and take a look at those books. And I have to say that um, I let out a family secret. Some of those books I self-published, and the person who coordinated them all is that smiling, beautiful young lady
Aw.
talking to. Uh,
I,
and
I,
I have to give you a plug, Sandy. You do a wonderful job of not only bringing together, not only encouraging writers to do their best, but I think you bring together editors and illustrators and formatters and all the different people who are involved in putting out a book. And then you go one step beyond and you run a bestseller drive on Amazon, which helps kind of kickstart the person's book and gets it out there to the market. and I have to admit that I'm very proud of you.
Aw, thank you, Dad. You know what? I have to say that when you asked me to help you with the first book that we did together, it was really a validation that I must be doing okay with it, because you're never a prophet in your own hometown, no matter how proud we want to be of our children. You know, we don't use them unless they're going to do okay for us.
Well, in our case, it was nonprofit, wasn't it?
Well, but no, I've enjoyed working with you, and I've enjoyed, you know, on all sides of it, both helping you publish your books and your advice on my books, and also helping on some of my clients' books.
It's been my pleasure.
So
Well, this is a
since you
mutual admiration society, but what would you expect?
but since you brought it up, let me get my little plug in there real quick.
Okay.
And yeah, here is my book, Book It. And if you want a free copy of my book, you can download it off my website, which is www.expertbook for you, the number 4 and the letter U, expertbook4you.com. And you can go and download a free copy of my book, Book It, for yourself. Well, Dad, thank you so much for coming and joining us and sharing some of your wisdom with my peoples. And I mean, obviously, you know, I wouldn't be where I am or who I am without you. So, you know, thank you for all of that.
Thank you, Sandi. And there's something I did forget to tell you during this
Oh,
interview.
oh, did you? I love you too, Dad.
How'd you know? I love you.
Anyways, Dad, hold on just one second. And YouTube and Facebook land, thank you for joining us on this interview. I know you learned a lot. I think that I think this is probably going to be one of my favorite interviews. Not just because I love the subject very much, but also I think, you know, we've gotten some great advice. I've learned something in this interview, so I hope you guys have too. Anyways, we will see you tomorrow when we'll be talking to my friend and client, Marianne Parker, who is an etiquette expert. And yeah, thanks for joining us. And until next time, go download a copy of my book, Book It. Go check out San Diego Jewish World, sdjewishworld.com. And until next time, go forth and bookify. Ah!